stables today to look at the life of the man who ran them with military precision for 30 years. Battery Sergeant Major Tom Rishworth of the Royal Horse Artillery, the Wentworth Stud and Hunt Groom. In the early 1900s, horses were the pride and passion of the 7th Earl Billy Fitzwilliam and his wife Countess Maud. Their children learnt to ride practically as soon as they could walk. Billy was an unparalleled sportsman. He loved hunting, playing polo, racing and training, and of course, breeding them. Horses were centre stage at Wentworth Woodhouse, as were the men who cared for them. In 1911, there were 7 live-in staff, as well as Ernest Whitworth, the groom, and Jessie Miles, the chauffeur. And ex-Battery Sergeant Tom Rishworth presided over them all and over the handful of other stable staff scattered around the estate. On the night of the census of the 2nd of April 1911, he lived here in what is now called the Ostler's house, sharing spacious 9-room accommodation with his wife Alice and their 4 children. These rooms, which in the early 1900s rang with children's voices, are now completely derelict and unsafe. Then they were part of a large, comfortable family home.
I live here in the head groom's house at Wentworth with my wife Alice and 4 kids. And on the 2nd of April 1911, the night of the census, I was about to become a father for the 5th time.
When Bob Harris, the old schoolmaster, turned up to take the census and knocked on our door, Alice was upstairs with the midwife, in labour, and I was trying to listen out for what was going on upstairs and keep an eye on our 3 lads in the yard. Our eldest, Elsie, was away in London visiting Alice's theatrical musician relatives and doubtless having a whale of a time, which left me with the boys. Little Margaretta made her appearance on the wrong side of midnight, just too late to be recorded for the census. We've been here getting on for 2 years, since I retired as instructor at the Royal Artillery Military School of the Woolwich Arsenal.
It was a bit of a strange twist of fate that brought me here to Wentworth. 90 years ago, the Fitzwilliams and the Rishworths moved in the same circles. But that were 90 years ago.
You might say that I'm a self-made man from a humble background. Born in the village of Newton, Wakefield, I'm one of 10, the son of a colliery worker who could barely read and write. But my great-grandfather, Thomas, was chief constable of Wakefield. He owned Birthwaite Hall in Darton. He made a fortune as a partner in the prestigious York Bank, Wentworth, Challoner, Rishworth & Co.
Aye, made a fortune and lost it. Some of the partners paid a higher price than others.
Robert Challoner, the senior director, was an MP and a cousin by marriage of the Fitzwilliams, who owned a big house here. The 4th Earl paid his debts, saved his Yorkshire properties and packed him off to Ireland to run his Irish estates. Probably saved some of the savings of the smaller investors too. My great-granddad sold everything and still ended up in a debtor's prison. My granddad too, briefly, till he convinced the courts that he had nothing to do with the bank's collapse, having been serving in the cavalry in India at the time.
But he didn't stop the scandal ruining him. He worked as a law stationer when he could get the work, and a labourer when he couldn't. Ended up back in prison for obtaining 2 shillings by fraud.
Alice says it's a real riches to rags story. We could have been living in our own mansion, she says, with a host of servants. She'd have liked that. I tell her, the house we have here is a mansion, in comparison to where I grew up.
When Billy Fitzwilliam, present Earl, offered me this job, he never mentioned it, but I often wonder if it was in the back of his mind, an opportunity to balance things up a bit, and to do a favour for a fellow old soldier.
My dad died when I was 14. My sisters joined the worsted carpet factory, and my brothers eventually became postmen and railway clerks.
I escaped to the army. It was the making of me.
On the 7th of February 1887, I enlisted for 12 years with the Royal Field Artillery. I spent the next 22 years with them, rising through the ranks to become Battery Sergeant Major. I served in Ireland, India, and, like Billy Fitzwilliam, in the Boer War. I saw action at Cape Colony, Transvaal, Tuliga Heights, and I was there for the relief of Ladysmith. When I returned from South Africa, I married my Alice, who was a housemaid then, and finished up my service as an instructor back at the Royal Artillery Arsenal at Woolwich.
When Tom retired in 1909, he was a fit, barrel-chested 39-year-old, 5'7" tall, in possession of a Good Conduct and Long Service Medal, and a record as an excellent master of horse and a supremely effectual instructor. And Billy Fitzwilliam had exactly the job for him. He began work as the hunt groom. However, within weeks, the vicar, recording the baptism of little Greta, noted,
"Baptized 25th of May 1911, Margaretta, daughter of Tom and Alicia Louisa Rishworth, abode Wentworth, stud groom."
I was now in charge of the day-to-day management of the stud and hunt stables and the men who worked in them. It was my job to ensure that the horses were turned out in tip-top condition, week in, week out, sometimes as many as 130 in a season. For the autumn hunting, I'd be up at 3 a.m, directing the other staff to prepare the horses. It was also my job to keep up with the Earl and Countess when hunting, a job no one envied. The Earl was a fine horseman, but the Countess was something else. When the hounds ran, it was all any of us could do to keep her in sight.
Tom was a superb horseman, able to ride any horse in the stables, jump any fence the Fitzwilliams jumped, and all the time he had to be ready, riding one-handed, to take control of a loose horse while holding his horse in position purely with his legs.
At the end of a long and exhausting day, I'd still have to groom and rub down the horses in the evening. My duty as stud groom meant I also handled the stallions and organised brood mares to be covered, and I turned out the mares and foals into the fields. My first priority was always the welfare of the animals. I'd leave instructions for horses that needed medical treatment, special diets, or fitting with new shoes from the farrier.
It was a post he was to hold for 30 years, with only one break of service, the years he fought in World War I.
In 1910, I was one of the first recruits to the Earl's new territorial force, the West Riding Royal Horse Artillery. The force was outfitted with horses from the stables, and we stored the artillery guns and maintained them in the gun park nearby. The village called us Saturday night soldiers, as we drilled once a week in the local drill hall. The men held down jobs in and around the estate, villages and mines, but gave up their Saturday nights for drill and training. We also spent 2 weeks under canvas on annual exercises in the park, and sometimes further afield on Dartmoor.
Tom was to earn a well-deserved reputation for turning out outstanding men and officers during World War I. When war came in 1914, he became a full-time soldier, serving first at home and then in Egypt, where he was discharged with a Silver War badge for incapacity due to sickness.
I finally made it back home to the stables in 1919. It was a bittersweet return. I'd spent 2.5 years in Egypt. I'd missed so much of the kids. Little Greta was almost 8. So many of the brave lads I trained with were dead, or worse. And those magnificent horses I'd bred and trained, hunters with great hearts who could leap across railway lines without fear or hesitation or take a pit bank in their stride. The stalls were empty and the nameplates taken down. I'm not ashamed to say it brought a lump to my throat.
Tom served as stud and hunt groom at Wentworth for another 21 years. Gradually, the stables filled again, although they probably never approached their pre-war glory days. Tragedy struck the Rishworths twice. In 1921, their 17-year-old eldest son George, working at the Earl Simplex factory, accidentally knocked a wart off his hand with a hammer and died of septicemia 3 weeks later. And in 1944, their third son, Major Francis Rishworth of the Royal Ordnance, would die in Calcutta. In 1928, the Earl, now in his mid-50s, disbanded the Wentworth Hunt and sold his treasured hunters. It must have been a day of heartbreak for Tom too. In 1933, Tom was one of a party of 100 privileged estate workers, servants, tenants, officials, miners, cricket club members and Royal Artillery comrades from Wentworth, invited to attend the wedding of the Earl and Countess's only son Peter in Dublin. And 3 years later, in 1936, when his daughter Greta married, he and Greta were collected by the Earl's chauffeur and driven to Wentworth Church. It was a mark of the esteem the Earl held Tom and his family in, and an acknowledgement of Tom's long service. Tom retired in 1940 and died 6 years later, aged 80. He rests in the graveyard with his wife Alice at the church at Wentworth. We hope you've enjoyed the life stories of our unsung heroes, the extraordinary staff and servants who played such important roles in the story of Wentworth Woodhouse. If you have a story about a family member who worked at Wentworth Woodhouse, we'd love to hear it. Goodbye until then.